Okay, so welcome to the third part of what makes our inner work work. This series is really based on my experience, mainly on things that I have discovered for myself first during, for at least, well, actually more than 30 years. It depends how you count. Looking into this for me right now involves really going back, checking my life, including reading old diaries, letters, old dreams, poems, and all sorts of stuff like that, to kind of make it even clearer to myself and hopefully to other people who might be interested, what actually makes our inner work work. Now, when calling something inner work, you could ask, what is inner work? So inner work can be really many things. It can be, anything from meditation and yoga to doing voice dialogue to using all sorts of other ways and which you can either invent or study. Things that help you in the long run, I would say, to become more and more whole and complete, to feel more and more at home in yourself, to accept more and more of yourself, to know more and more of yourself. And all this enables you to flower. It can take time sometimes it's very fast, but it's an unending thing, flowering. You can always be new and fresh and flower anew. And it's a very fascinating route to take naturally, or I wouldn't be devoting so much of my time to it. And when you do flower more and more, again and again, with all the challenges on the way, everything begins to look different. It's not that everything is perfect. It doesn't mean that you're solved. Sometimes to the contrary, but you are different. And when you are different, everything else is different. And of course, you can also have much more joyful experience with others. And you can also be helpful to others in a much deeper way, having been helpful to yourself. And today we're going to devote this meeting to something that I consider perhaps, it's difficult to say, but it's definitely one of the most important things for me in my life. It's something that I call not knowing. I'm not the only one who talks about it. So I call this part the importance of not knowing. Looking back into my past, I discovered something interesting that I wrote when I was 34. It was in August 1998. It was a time in my life in which I had another round of a big jump into the unknown. From having a nice career as a freelance designer and doing, creating graphic design and books and stuff like that, I made a complete cut with that. I left it all behind, and I took a year off. And in this year off, which I will tell you more about in some other meeting we might have in the future, I did a huge amount of inner work. And And that was the year when I discovered for the first time in my life what I really wanted to do, apart from what I already did, which was, for example, graphic design. What I really wanted to do that would really kind of, I would feel that really used my abilities to the utmost. So this jump for me was a very courageous one, because I jumped into the unknown. I had no idea what I was going to do in the future, really no idea. It was very scary and very freeing, and it brought me to things that brought me a lot of happiness and very deep satisfaction. So in this time, I also discovered, you know, a lot about what makes our inner work. And this is the thing I found that I wrote in August 98. I am playing around a lot with not knowing anything about anything. A lot of my life now seems to revolve about not knowing, giving knowing up again and again. I'm also playing with daring. I feel embarrassed, vulnerable, embarrassed sometimes to simply be what I am, whatever that is, to bring forth my power as it is. I don't know so much sometimes that it hurts. And sometimes it is most blissfully, foolishly free. I feel I am expanding, and it does not always feel comfortable. But feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable seems promising. And a little bit later, I think it was probably a few months later, I wrote, I don't care too much for what is known by humanity. What interests me more is what we choose to create, to allow, to discover. So I was a bit surprised to find that, especially this second part, I know that not knowing has been a vital part of my expansion, of my development, of my joy. But I was a little bit surprised by the sentence so early in 98 saying that I don't care too much for what is known by humanity. And that remained to a certain degree till today. So of course, what is known by humanity can be very, very interesting, but I always feel that it's a very tiny part of what there is to know, if we want to, about humanity, about life, about each and every one of us. Preparing for this meeting, I found something very interesting in the, I don't know exactly if it's the site, but one of the NASA sites on the internet. I was searching for, you know, kind of a new definition or a few words about what is called today dark energy and dark matter. So in the NASA site, I found the following. What is dark energy? More is unknown than is known. We know how much dark energy there is because we know how it affects the universe's expansion. Other than that, it is a complete mystery. But it is an important mystery. It turns out that roughly 68% of the universe is dark energy. Dark matter makes up about 27%. The rest, which is everything on Earth, everything ever observed with all of our instruments, all normal matter, adds up to less than 5% of the universe. So matter and energy as we know it explains about 5%, and all the rest is a mystery. Okay. Now, whenever I think about it again, you know, it's somewhat shocking, you know, that everything we consider life is such a tiny part of what there seems, you know, as far as we can tell, there is in the universe. And this is what we know now. There may be much, much more that we're not aware of. Now, I'm bringing this up not because it proves anything about the value of not knowing, but it's a reminder to us that we really know very, very little, and that it makes a lot of sense to remember that, to not fall into this very, very common trap that we all fall into once in a while or during our entire life, it can also happen, of thinking that we know. And when I say that, it's not only knowing about the universe or energy or stuff like that, it's knowing who we are. If I decided at the age of 34 in 98 that I know who I am, then, you know, there would be nothing to do, you know, to explore, to find out, to discover, to develop into, because I would be mistakenly believing that I know myself. And of course, I knew a little bit. I knew perhaps more than a lot of other people, but it was still very, very little. And the ability to really expand into this unknowingness of both myself and of other people, I discovered it was extremely fertile and very, very freeing. Now, once in a while, it can cause anxiety, of course, because we mostly feel much more comfortable when we know. You know, I know who I am, I know who you are, I know what's possible, I know what's impossible, I know the world, I know how it works. You know, it's kind of a safe zone for us to live in. But of course, it's very much an illusion. You know, just thinking about the coronavirus suddenly descending upon us and shuffling the cards so much is just one more example of how much we don't know and how much we can be surprised. But the other side of it, apart from the feeling that we might have of, you know, of anxiety or discomfort when we discover that we know very, very little about ourselves and about everything, the other side of it can be a sense of great freedom and amazing joy and happiness and all sorts of other very cool things to experience. Because knowing is also restrictive. Of course, I'm not saying that we shouldn't know anything at all. We know stuff and we need to know it. It's part of our life. But if we confuse ourselves into believing that we know everything we need to know and that, you know, whatever we don't know is not really important, or, you know, we don't allow this flexible freedom of not knowing, we find ourselves moving in circles in a way. You know, it's like searching for your key under the light, you know, when of course it can be somewhere else. but you only look where you already know, and then you don't find the key or the keys, really. So even though being in this unknowingness can sometimes create stress and anxiety and confusion and all sorts of things like that, it is extremely freeing. It frees ourselves from ourselves. And it's also a lot of fun, because then once we allow ourselves to be more often in this kind of situation, we can also start enjoying the fun of the ride, the thrill of exploration, the adventure that our life can be in so many ways. So if you think that being in this state of not knowing more often could be a good thing, then let's talk a little bit about good questions to ask, things that help us get there more often. For example, one of the things that I sometimes find myself asking myself is something like, is it really so? Or is this the truth? Or is there another way of looking at this? Can I see this from a different point of view or from a different angle? Can I find a part of myself that thinks or feels the opposite? And also, what more is possible? What more can I find within myself through my inner work or in any other way? And this frees me not only within me to expand and explore more and more, it also frees me to not know too much about my friends, my family, people I work with, my students. Because again, if I mistakenly think that I know whoever it is that I'm talking to or that I'm looking at or whatever, that I've figured them out, that I really know who they are, what they might do and what they won't do and what they might be thinking and all that, then I'm really limiting the relationship and the connection. And I'm sort of limiting the person. And I find out that the more I open up to not knowing, the more I make it kind of create a space, perhaps I would say, create a space that not only enables me to grow better and more, but is also very beneficial for others. It's kind of helpful if somebody next to you doesn't kind of put you into a tiny little box, but continues to be kind of, I don't really know you, and is aware of the mystery, the unending mystery and the unsolvable mystery, thank God, of who we are. Because really we are huge, we are endless. And in my many years of inner work, I keep discovering very surprising things about myself. So I say, okay, if this is what I'm discovering about myself, you know, it's probably right for everybody. But we need to make it possible for us to expand and discover. When we live like that, it's even sometimes as if we're wiping ourselves clean to a certain degree. Now, just restarting. And I've had quite a few stages in my life where I really felt like I was being rubbed out completely so that I don't know myself anymore. And then I reappear and rediscover myself. And of course, the rubbing out is not complete. It's not as if you completely disappear, but there's something about this willingness to just not know who you are at all and be ready to almost dissolve into nothing, that enables a new beginning and creates a freshness in very many ways. This ability to, again and again, however old you are, to experience the world with new eyes, almost like a baby, while retaining all your experience and knowledge and so on. Just being new, okay, again and again and again. This is part of that flowering that I was talking about. This also connects with something that I will talk about in the future in one of the other meetings I'm planning in this series. And that is about being what I call a loving detective and a sensitive spy of ourselves, of life, and even of the universe, for whoever is interested in exploring the universe in certain ways. So to be a good loving detective or sensitive spy, you really need to be free of prior conceptions and to just, look at the clues if you're a scientist or a loving detective with a fresh mind. And when you do that, you see much more. It's very interesting to see how much we all, me included, of course, we all see things that we're sort of used to seeing. And once we manage to be kind of more open-minded and less knowing, we suddenly find that we can shift our gaze in directions that we didn't even know were there. And we suddenly see things that as if weren't there before, but they were. We just didn't look that way. So again, it is another huge gift and benefit of training ourselves in all sorts of ways in not knowing. Two last things, I think. One of the main ways that I work is with inner selves or inner parts, based on a method called voice dialogue. And voice dialogue sees us as containing many, many selves, which can be completely opposing to each other. I can have one self that is kind and another self that can be nasty, okay? And that's sort of the normal state of affairs. And I choose how to behave in this world, whether to be more kind or more nasty or, anything in between. This, of course, requires work, but I'm bringing this up because one of the interesting things that happens for those people who do enough of that type of work, of working with and discovering opposing selves or parts within themselves, is that they very naturally become more unknowing or not knowing, because the moment you see things from a few perspectives, like from one perspective can be optimistic and the other pessimistic, for instance, then you begin to doubt your very, very strict truths, about who you are, for example. You know, if you can be both optimistic and pessimistic, you have two opposing selves within you, then who are you? Are you optimistic or pessimistic? And who's right? Your optimistic side or your pessimistic side? Or, you know, and you can check that out in regarding many other things. So you become very much aware that the truth is a very tricky thing, I would say. That what is truth for one person is false for another. What is absolutely true for one part of me can be completely untrue for another. So I become flexible within this, okay? I can see things this way and I can see things that way. And my understanding of truth and what is right and knowing what is right and what is true becomes more and more complex in a good way, more whole, I would say, because I can see things from many angles and not only from one angle, okay? The last thing I want to talk before we move to our second part of the meeting is about being humble. You know, the last meeting we had was more about recognizing and allowing ourselves to experience our greatness, our, you know, in every little thing even, you know, of course in the big things, but also in very small things. We are so unimpressed by our greatness so many times. So now it's perhaps a good opportunity to remind us that in this too, it's very wise and healthful to remain connected to the two opposites. So I can both feel and believe and realize that I'm great and wonderful, and that many things that I do deserve deep appreciation. On the other hand, this unknowing is also very humbling, and that's a very good opposing force to feeling really wonderful and great and able. So I can, you know, have these two truths at the same time. A, I'm endless. I can never know myself. I can never fathom how multifaceted and amazing a creature I am, which is the truth. And at the same time, I can remain humble and remember that I know very little, if anything, that there's so much about the universe that I don't know, and that I am a universe in which I know only a tiny little bit. And living that way, I find, is a very balanced and fascinating experience. Okay, so we'll take a few seconds of a break and then we'll meet again. And if you have questions, you will be very welcome to ask them either in the chat or in another way. So 2 seconds and we're back.